I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
I'm Angeli Preston.
We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is What's Next, a dedicated hour to have important conversations about the issues facing the marginalized and underrepresented communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario.
We're going to have some real healing. We've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truth.
What's Next continues our mission to discuss race,
Equity,
And the common concerns of Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
Good morning and welcome to What's Next. Today we talk with the former Buffalo Poet Laureate, Jillian Hanesworth. Jillian?
Hi,
and thanks for joining us.
Definitely.
The whole idea of you being the former Poet Laureate because you were the first Poet Laureate of Buffalo.
Yeah. I haven't heard anyone say that yet, so you're the first person. But it's okay. It's okay. I'm glad that the role has taken a life of its own, and I'm glad that I don't have to be in it for it to be sustainable. Because if that's how it was created, it wouldn't last very long.
Right.
And it was created to be bigger than just me. You know, I know people will think of me when they think of the role itself, but it's bigger than me. So it's time for, a new voice to step in and make it their own.
That's a very gracious approach for sure. At the same time, though, as we go back, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you in here is just for that, a chance to maybe reflect on what obviously has been a very eventful time, not only for you in your personal and professional life, but also here in the city of Buffalo. But if we can just step back to that drive that you had, because this is really pretty much you that pushed this forward, the idea of having a Poet Laureate in Buffalo. What was your motivation?
Honestly, I was really starting to find my voice in poetry and starting to create my identity here as someone who uses the art to organize and to inspire and activate the community. So as that was happening, I started seeing cities around the country appoint a Poet Laureate. And I'm like, it would be so cool to see our city take that same approach, and really use their positions to put some backing behind this art because it's storytelling, it's our tradition. This is what we do as a people. So I started to go to council members and ask, would you be interested in backing this? And finally, the Maston District council member, Ulysses Wingo, he was like, yeah, let's do it. So for a couple of years, I learned how to write resolutions and I worked with his staff, and we just did all this work to establish this role. And finally, he brought it to the Common Council, and they voted to establish the role and to make me the first.
Okay, so that's interesting. So they established the role to make you the first, but moving forward, it's going to work, as I understand it, it's going to work differently. It's not just going to be one person who's just appointed, let's say, by a Common Council resolution, right?
Well, there always will be a Common Council resolution, and the understanding was always that I'm just the first, not that I'd be the only. So we wrote it in so that each Poet Laureate has a term limit. I know we're a city that often likes to function without them, but I thought there was some benefit to them. So it's a 2-year term, so every 2 years, we should expect to see a new Poet Laureate. I'm not sure right now what that process looks like from the city's point of view. And I'm hoping that over the next couple of years, I can collaborate with the city to kind of make sure that the vision for this being a community role where the people are really in touch with who gets selected to represent them on this platform, we can make it more along the line of that kind of process.
Right.
Maybe a community council where we know who the members are, and anonymous submissions so that poets, regardless of what size platform they already have a chance to say, hey, look at my work. I can do this too. I think about my own journey, and a lot of writers, they get started in academia or they go into the slam poetry community, and I didn't get started that way. You know, I was at protests and at vigils and at memorial services of people who I never met, just trying to spark something in the community. So my platform was not big in the way some other writers are. I wasn't
Understood.
known in that community. They had no idea who I was. Now, the community, you know, people who live on the east side, they started to get an idea. But we all enter this in a different way. So I think coming up with a public process, a transparent process, where people who have a love for this art, regardless of how they got there, can all get an equal shot at being able to stand on this platform is necessary. So I'm hoping that I can collaborate with the city, or at least just express some of my own ideas for how this can happen in the future. So we can make sure that everybody has an understanding of how this is going.
Right. So we can understand how there might be, maybe we'll kindly use the word confusion about how we were going to move forward with this, because it was a unique development a couple of years ago to have you as the poet laureate. Let's maybe just talk in an ideal world. I know there was a resolution passed in December, if I read it and understood it vaguely, that this next laureate might be appointed by the mayor. But we'll leave that aside for now. But if you were going to just say how it should develop and how perhaps people should come to the table for this, how would you like to see it done?
Well, I think first we have to start and look at what we want this role to be.
Right.
Like, do we want this to continue to be someone who is active in serving the community? If that's the case, then the community has to take the reins on deciding who it is. Ideally, I would take someone from the art community and someone from the literary community and a few people from, you know, maybe organizations or just community groups. They don't even have to be 501c3s, you know, active community groups, maybe a member of our city's youth. They would sit on a council, and members of the community who want to be poet laureate, who say, I have what it takes to lead in this way, they'll submit. They'll submit some writing, maybe an essay, or just something to really show their passion for this community anonymously. And the commission, they would read these submissions and debate them and talk about them, and keeping in mind who we want this person to be, what we want them to represent for our community. And then they would make the recommendation to the mayor if he wants to be the one to appoint. I will never, debate that, but they would make the recommendation to the mayor for him to appoint someone based off of that search.
What about the let's turn it then to the person who thinks they want to be poet laureate. We'll put it that way, thanks, because you never know it until you do it, and you most certainly know about the experience and how your role has changed for sure here. But what about that person, do you think, who wants to be that poet laureate for Buffalo? What should be, or I don't think we have to talk. I don't think you necessarily want to narrow down subject matter.
Yeah, no.
But in terms of approach and maybe just a general philosophy, perhaps, about poetry and about this community as well.
Yeah, I think they just have to have a heart for the people, and they have to have the selflessness to understand that a lot of times you are going to be representing people who don't look like you, or helping people through something that nobody has ever experienced in proximity to you. A lot of times you have to put your own feelings to the side in order to lead. I know some people are like, it's just poetry. Like, you just write poems and you get a platform and you get to work with the bills and you get to go on the radio. But no, you have to really stand for something, and you have to be about that. There are so many times that I do interviews like this and people email me or they message me on my website and they're just like, I'm so inspired by what you said. I'm so inspired by what you do. And for every 5 people who send me that email, I get another one that's like, who do you think you are? You have to understand that it's not about you. So none of that matters. The awards, they're beautiful, but they don't matter in the grand scope of things. because whatever it is that you are trying to inspire the community to do, everyone won't be an activist, right? But whatever it is that you are, whatever the platform is that you're standing on, the thing that you believe in is, you have to be willing to stand on that regardless. Even when you get tired or it gets hard, or you're balancing being the poet laureate with having your regular job or being in school or whatever it is that you do, you have to keep going. So I think as long as the person who thinks I can be the poet laureate, they're going into it thinking I can really serve this community, I really have something to say that I think will push us forward, then I think go for it. But if your mindset is, I want to make videos with the Sabres and I want to stand out amongst my community of poets, don't do it. You're not ready. It's not time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to look at it. Jillian Hanesworth, our guest, and as you may have heard at the top, the former poet laureate for the city of Buffalo. Her term has expired, and we're looking forward to perhaps who will be the next poet laureate. What about during your time as this?
Mm-hmm.
Have poets come out of the woodwork and found you? I bet they have.
Yeah, a lot. Sometimes they're just like, I love what you do. Like, you're so good. Let's collaborate. But sometimes they're like, I need you to prove yourself to me. I've had a lot of poets who have come to me like, listen, I had no idea who you were. So I'm glad that it was you ultimately, but I was very hesitant when I first heard your name because I didn't know you. And I get it. I don't feel like, again, it's my role to prove myself to people.
Right.
Because that's pride, and again, it's not about me. So I'm just like, I'm saying what's on my heart and what I really do believe my community needs to hear. But I have had quite a few poets just be like, when we first heard you were going to be the poet laureate, we were like, who is this girl? Like, who are you? And we were hesitant. We were doubtful. But over time, you've shown us who you are.
What, like you said, it's not about proving yourself. It's not about you. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be about the individual. At the same time, what do you think won over the doubters? I guess if I'll put them in that category.
Honestly, I think it's just because I have good work. Like
Okay.
the poems are good, and I think it's also just the way that they see I'm able to connect with the people that I'm performing for. And that I really do believe the things that I write about. Like if I have a poem or a line in a poem about something like political, like you can believe that is 1,000% how I actually feel.
Okay.
The concepts in the poem about, the poems that I have had that the community really kind of gravitated to about like love and power, that's truly, truly what I believe. So I think the fact that I stand on what it is I say, they're like, okay, she's honest, authentic, and a good writer, so we'll rock with her.
What about the idea of I think I already know the answer to this, but you're standing up for something, and we know how it is when people stand up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who want to knock you down. Have you received that kind of backlash at times?
Absolutely. It comes from a lot of different directions. Sometimes it's people who are just like, we like what you're doing, but like chill out a little bit. Like it's just too much. Sometimes, I've said things on the radio and had local leaders, community leaders, or elected officials call me like, you're doing way too much because I'm opposing them too hard.
But when that's interesting.
Yeah.
You say you're opposing them. Are you opposing them, or are you, as you said before, speaking the truth as you understand it, and other people are interpreting it as criticism? Is that maybe an adequate
I think
description?
That's what it is. And I never wake up saying I'm going to make so and so mad today. That's not how I think. But if you ask me a question, I'm gonna be honest, and I'm going to center the needs of the community around it, regardless of who you are, or if we, give each other a hug when we see each other in Wegmans. It doesn't matter. I've unknowingly picked a few fights over the last couple of years. But that's okay. That's okay. I don't mind.
Do you know sometimes, though, when you write a piece and you're performing it in public that, this might ruffle a few feathers?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes when I write it, I'm like, ugh, I'm dreading performing this because I already know people are going to be mad. I have poems where, I've performed them at protests and I've seen police officers kind of turn red, or, I've performed pieces and really connected to the community, and I'll see politicians, at restaurants, and they won't talk to me. And I have some pieces that I've read to my mom, and she was like, please don't perform that. Like, just don't, because we do have to remember that we're challenging power structures, and that's a really dangerous position to take. So I have some pieces that my mom was like, don't ever perform that. So I'm going to respect her fears and not perform them. And I know if I did, a lot of people would be upset. I wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah, not me.
Well, you've got me curious. My nature is to prod that a little bit more, but I think I'll let you rest on that.
I'll tell you some stuff offline.
Very good, very good. Well, we'll get a couple of minutes to do that right now, as a matter of fact. We're going to take a break on What's Next and come back with more. Jillian Hanesworth, Buffalo Poet Laureate. Her term has expired. She is with us here on What's Next, and we'll be back with more. This is What's Next on WBFO.
This is the Buffalo-Toronto Public Media History Bite, bringing you a peek into significant historical events for the week of January 8th through January 14th. I'm your host and program director, Tom Barrich. The aeronautical design company that brought you the X-1, the first supersonic aircraft, the Bell 30, widely regarded as the first commercial helicopter, and the very real rocket belt, i.e. jetpack, Bell Aircraft Corporation was founded on January 10, 1935. January 10, 1863 is the date that the Buffalo Historical Society was founded. That, incidentally, is the society that shifted into the Buffalo History Museum, where most of these facts are coming from. If you enjoyed a coffee and or pastry from Tim Hortons this morning, you can, of course, thank Tim Horton and wish him a happy birthday. He was born on January 11th, 1930 in Cochrane, Ontario. And on June 14th, 1916, the University at Buffalo basketball team plays its very first official game. You've been listening to the Buffalo-Toronto Public Media History Bite. Discover more stories about Western New York's past on the Buffalo History Museum's website. Learn more at buffalohistory.org. For Buffalo-Toronto Public Media, I'm Tom Barrich.
Hi, I'm Christina. I love exploring the world around me, and I have behind-the-scenes VIP tickets to some of the most exciting places and people in Western New York, and you can come along with me from wherever you are. Let's go! A new series you can watch on WNED PBS, the Buffalo-Toronto Public Media YouTube channel, and on PBS Learning Media nationwide.
So let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go!
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And welcome back to What's Next. With us today, Jillian Hanesworth, the first Buffalo Poet Laureate, and now a former Buffalo Poet Laureate. Jillian, I want to, obviously, can't have you in here for 45 minutes and not hear some of your poetry. So as a matter of fact, we've got a couple of things that you've actually performed in public before. This first one that we want to listen to is Paint My People Green.
paint my peace in serenity green. Let it soak in the sun and blossom in the spring. Build it with intention and then build a city around it. Make it beautiful as if designed by Olmsted himself. Let it absorb the rain, creating a scent as sweet as hope, for everybody needs a place that smells as ripe as freedom. Birthed by Mother Earth, connected to the ancestors in the midst of man-made shambles, paint it all green. Let it be deeply rooted in power and belonging. Let it belong to us. Let it refresh the lungs and delight the eyes and the spirit and the mind, a mind of its own. Let it think for itself. Let its belief run clear through the limits we create. Let it manifest a newness, reminding us of the changing of the seasons, the changing of the tides, the changing of the guards. Let it redefine what access means. Let me plant my peace like a seed and watch it sprout, growing and expanding into 850 acres of healing and of justice. Let it be as welcoming as a park swing to a child, custom designed to bring joy in the form of prickly blades of grass and dandelions floating through the skies, delivering messages to heaven. Interwoven circles of excellence and purpose, paint my people green and fill them with life. Fill them with the benefit of knowing that fresh air is their right, with the satisfaction of realizing that trees were grown with them in mind, masterworks constructed for masterpieces and sustained for over 200 years, celebrated with triumph and appreciation, and then protected from even yourself. For good things can only remain good if it lives with intent, and this living land was intended for us. It's where we find life and where we learn that green justice is racial justice, it's economic justice. It's a chance to not only survive but thrive, and everybody deserves the chance to thrive. Let us celebrate our green. From Martin Luther King Jr. to Delaware, a backyard fit for kings that was custom fitted for the Queen City, with a crown bestowed onto us by a mind inspired by God himself, who saw what once was and decided to paint it all green. Thank you.
It's Jillian Hanesworth. I think that was recorded maybe in the late spring of 2022 out at, I think it's called Soldiers Circle. It was an event by the Olmsted Parks Conservancy. As you listen back to yourself, what do you think?
That's a good poem.
It sure was.
That was one of my first opportunities to do like a commissioned piece. The Frederick Law Olmsted Conservancy contacted me and said that they were having a 200th year
right.
anniversary, and they asked me to write a poem. And I was so nervous because I wasn't sure if I could like take all of this reverence that they had and that I was learning. You know, I didn't really know too much about Frederick Law Olmsted before writing this piece. Like, how do I take all of this and put it into a poem where they feel like this covers everything in our mind, and I feel like I delivered a product for them. And they loved it, and I loved it. But that was one of my first opportunities where someone came to me and said, you know, we're going to give you some ideas, and can you write a poem for us? So, yeah.
So they gave you some ideas about this, yet did they have final refusal or whatever you came up with was going to be good enough that day?
Yeah, whatever I came up with was going to be what it was. I did send it to them in advance a few days before, because I always like to tell people when I do a commission piece, like, you know, this is your piece. I'm writing it, but it's for you. So you can give me feedback and I can make any adjustments. But they loved it. And I went and performed it that day for the first time. And since then, I've only said it a couple of times, but I love that piece so much.
It really is. It's a wonderful piece, and again, I've heard it quite a few times because I've had the recording for all this time. But even just listening to it now, little elements unfold in front of me, and I think one of the striking part is, I think you sum up everybody around here in terms of their reverence for the parks, but you include in there the idea that access is not universal.
Right, it's not. I mean, even when you think about the parks in Buffalo, right? If you were to say, what park do we see mostly Black residents? You're going to be like MLK. And what park do we see like a lot of white people during the day? Delaware Park.
Right.
Like it's our city is so divided that even when you think about the park system, you can kind of tell what park people are going to gravitate to. I remember being younger and going to Delaware Park because that's where like the basketball courts were, and you had more of a chance to be like questioned by a random person at Delaware Park than you did at Martin Luther King Park. But you had more, like there was a higher chance of you being watched by the police at Martin Luther King Park than Delaware Park. So like when we think about how our parks work, it's not a symbol of democracy, but that's what a park is supposed to be. It's supposed to be open to everybody and free to everybody. Like it's supposed to be something that we all have equal access to. And that's not necessarily how things work here. But that doesn't mean that we can't reimagine it to be able to work that way. So that's what that piece was.
And so where you're putting this piece together and you're writing it, then, like you said, you didn't know a lot of the history about the parks and Olmsted and such, and yet you had already you're able to put your own experiences and mix those two together like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even know growing up that like Martin Luther King Park, Delaware Park were Frederick Law Olmsted parks. Like,
Right.
I didn't know.
Sure.
They were just parks to me. But when I started to hear about them, and the first thing I did was learn about Frederick Law Olmsted. Like, how did you come to the point where you are designing, you know, our, at the time, the urban landscape of our city? And I learned about how much he did for abolition and just how much of an activist he was and what he intended to do when he was creating these park systems. And my first thought was like, that's really cool, but that is not that is not what's happening right now. So I decided to really lean into that idea, what he intended to do, and how we can still reimagine it to function that way.
So this is so that's relatively early in your term as poet laureate. Maybe just talk a little bit about how things were to start off as in that role, because we know, and we're going to get into the history here. Once May came around, you know, obviously a lot happened, and you found your voice was very much a part of things to come. But what about in those early days? What was it? Was just kind of a novelty? How were people embracing what you were doing?
So the community immediately, they were like, you're the poet laureate. Like I would get, you know, emails like, can you come talk to our women's group at our church? And like, can you come and talk to these students at this school? Like the community they were already on board before I was the poet laureate. Like before I was that, I was still Jillian Hanesworth, who had something to say, and they were already willing to listen. So once I became the poet laureate, they were like, this is so cool. Like, we have a poet laureate. Some of my friends couldn't even say it. They would call me like the poet literate or the poet laureate. And like, we're still working on it with some people.
Yeah, I understand.
But everybody was excited. And, but I wasn't like writing as many new pieces. Also, it was 2021. So we were just a year out from COVID. So we were still doing a lot of virtual events. A lot of the city events that we were accustomed to, they either weren't happening or they weren't as big. So the city, they weren't calling me to come and do like the MLK ceremony and things like that because we weren't really having anything. So I kind of got a little bit of a slow start. I was already working at Open Buffalo, so I left my job in 2020 after George Floyd's murder and started working at Open Buffalo. So I was at Open Buffalo, and it was a lot easier to kind of balance everything.
Right.
I was like the poet laureate on the weekends and just the director of leadership development during the week. So yeah, that definitely, it was a slow start when it came to the actual work, but the community, they were like, you're our poet laureate, and that's it. And they hit the ground running when it came to helping build the platform and make it mean something.
Yeah, I'll probably ask you a lot of questions about process, and artistic process is something that just it fascinates me. But what about, so I forgot about, like, you know, you're coming in, COVID is lingering. It's still kind of flaring up and shutting things down at times. So it does paint a whole different picture than what we saw in the summer of 2022.
Yeah.
what about for you and from a creative dynamic? Is it, I wouldn't say easier, but how does it differ, or how was it different during those early months of being the poet laureate, and it's COVID and things are slow, and then later on when all of a sudden there was, lots of activity and lots of commentary and lots of things happening? Well, how can you describe it for yourself? How it worked for you?
So when I first became the poet laureate, besides, COVID, and I started getting into a little bit more of like political commentary around the time of George Floyd's murder. So I did some of that from time to time, but it wasn't as frequent. It was like if somebody like you were to email me, like, I want to talk to you, it was like, I'm calling my mom, like, guess what, it wasn't really happening that much.
Right.
So I was able to really focus on, like, I started Buffalo Books at the time and, things like that. I was able to put a little bit more of my effort into community ventures, volunteering, having a 9-to-5 at a nonprofit, which, if you work at a nonprofit, it's kind of no such thing as a 9-to-5.
Right.
And luckily, the role I was in the organization I was at, they really emphasized rest and, taking care of yourself. But I had a lot more time on my hands, and every opportunity had its own life. And eventually, especially after May 14th, it's kind of like I'm working on multiple things at a time, all the time.
Right.
So I'm a lot busier now. But back then it was like, ooh, look, I get to do this thing. And I'm like texting my parents and we're all celebrating. And now it's just like everything's just like all the time.
All the time.
Back to back. Yeah.
We are talking with Jillian Hanesworth today on What's Next. Jillian Hanesworth, Buffalo's first poet laureate. You brought up 514, and I do appreciate you reflecting back. Just to take us through a couple things, you and I talked to a few different people on the night of the 15th, that Sunday night, and I do appreciate all the candor that you gave me that night. But you told me kind of how it went down for you on May 14th. If I'm not mistaken, what, a friend's bridal shower, is that how that went?
Baby shower.
Baby
yeah.
shower. Why don't you take us through how you remembered? I have it on tape. I know the story, but I want to hear from your recollection.
Yeah, I'll never ever forget like that whole day now. But yeah, I was at my best friend's baby shower, and we were just, celebrating the birth of her first child. And I started getting text messages saying like something's going on Jefferson. Like, do you know what's going on? When we started to see actual reports, we weren't seeing local reports. Like, we were seeing national news.
Right.
And before I saw a headline or read an article, I saw a photo. And I was like, I already know. I know what this is. And I kept looking at my phone, and my best friend eventually, we were starting to clean up, and she's like, you should go. So I still had on my dress, and I drove to Tops. And I parked in the parking lot right in front of Dollar General. Went into Dollar General and I bought some leggings, and I had a t-shirt in my gym bag, and I just kind of threw my clothes on in the car, and I just got out, and I don't know, for a moment it was kind of like surreal, I guess. People were starting to gather, and all of Tops was already taped off with caution tape. Marshals were in the streets. And yeah, it was just like, okay, something bad happened. But then people started to come to try to find their loved ones' cars in the parking lot and try to figure out where the Family Reunification Center was. And that's when it was like, okay, like this is something that we haven't gone through before. I started doing interviews that day. The most the heaviest memory that I still have is I was about to leave, and I left. Eventually I came back, but I just drove by Tops. I didn't actually go get out of the car. But I was about to leave, and I was emotionally spent. And this guy, I turned around and make eye contact with this guy. And when you make eye contact with somebody and you're just like, oh no, because you already know they're going to say something and you just don't want to talk. But he was just like, my aunt was in there. And I said, I'm sorry. I asked if she was okay. And he was just like, she's gone. She's gone. He was the first person who had lost someone to my knowledge. Like, he was the first person who I actually came in contact with who lost someone. And I just asked him, does he want a hug? And he said no. But, like, while he was saying no, he just started to, like, put all his body weight on me. And I just stood there and I just hugged this man. And if he walked past me today, I probably wouldn't be able to point him out. But we just stood on Jefferson hugging and just strangers. And that really just kind of sums up how those next few weeks went. Was just like, just trying to help a complete stranger get through something that none of us ever thought we'd have to get through.
That interaction, I appreciate you revisiting it. Did you see other that type of emotion there that day as well? That, the community trying to figure out what was going on and how to move forward?
I mean, there was panic that day. I remember starting to see things on Facebook, like there's a gunman walking down this street, and people would just start running, taking off. Some guy who I don't know, he pulled up next to me, and he was like, be safe out here. And, he told me he was going to that street to find that gunman. Like, we're not going to let you hunt us. Like, we're going to come to you. We will not let you hunt us. And that was heartbreaking, because all of these, these threats, they were fake, but we didn't know at the time. And you would literally just see people start running. And it's like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, somebody's coming this way with a gun. And so there was like panic. There was panic. I had a reporter ask me, he was from France, and it was the morning after. And I'm like, geez, like, what? At this point, I'll get to that in a second. But
sure.
He asked me, like, are you guys going to form a militia? And I'm like, what do you see happening around you right now? Look around and tell me what you see. He's like, I don't know. People are crying, hugging. I'm like, report on what you actually see happening. Like, that's what's happening right now. But the morning of May 15th, I went to a rally at Johnny B. Wiley, and then I came down. Well, we had to go around, because at that time, like, a few blocks of Jefferson were blocked off. So came back around, got out of my car. I parked at Open Buffalo because that's where I was working at the time. And I just saw the amount of cameras. And I had no idea. Like, when it happened, I knew it was big, but it was big for us.
Right.
I didn't realize tomorrow there are going to be 150 reporters here. Like, I didn't know. So that day really caught me off guard, because I was just going to be among the community, try to make some sense of it, I guess. I don't know. Everybody just kind of went there. So I just went too. And I wasn't expecting, though, to, like, have to, like, use my voice. Like, that wasn't what I was anticipating.
Speaking of using your voice, so as mentioned, setting this segment up, you and I did talk on the night of May 15th. And as a matter of fact, there were a lot of poignant things that we won't play the whole interview here, but I do have a soundbite that I'd like you to listen to right now. Just in essence, describing the east side of Buffalo.
Like, on the east side, we are creating culture, and that culture is being adapted into other communities across the city. But it starts on the east side. That's where the blueprint is. While we do have to deal with a lot of things that other people in Buffalo don't have to deal with. When you think about crime rates, highest in Buffalo, poverty rates, highest in Buffalo. And of course, we know crime is a symptom of poverty. COVID rates during the height of the pandemic, highest in Buffalo. Lead in the water, highest on the east side of Buffalo. These people are exposed to so much more than a lot of people in other neighborhoods could even understand. And even still, there's so much beauty that comes out of the culture of our community.
It's Jillian Hanesworth talking with WBFO on May 15th, 2022. You hear that that comment? I have referenced it in my mind hundreds of times, actually, since then. I thought it was a very powerful comment. What about from you as you can reflect back on it right now?
Thinking back, it makes me smile, because when I think about the days, the weeks after May 14th, I still feel anger and fear. So to know that in that moment, the beauty of my community is what stood out in my mind and what we were able to discuss, that makes me feel like really comforted. And of course, I still feel that way.
Right.
I describe the East Side as like the most colorful place in the city. And I think time and time again, because unfortunately, May 14th was like the first of like a series of just unfortunate things and painful things to happen in our community, and the East Side continues to feel the brunt of it. But you continue to see the beauty of the people and our willingness to help each other survive, along with our refusal to believe that our role here is just to survive. Like there's a beautiful power in that, and I think that it's unfortunate that we continue to be placed in positions where we have to use that power, we have to exercise that muscle. I would like us to be able to have a break from having to be reminded of how resilient we are, because resilience is a sign of a bigger issue, I think.
Right.
But we are, and it's beautiful. And I've tried to continue to remind myself of the beauty of where I come from, because the past couple of years, it's been mostly like pain, and it's been a pain that none of us have ever experienced, and we all kind of had to navigate through it together, and we did, and we still are. And I hope to continue to be a voice for our community and to speak to our community as we continue to heal, because it's a process that will never actually like finish. We'll never graduate from healing school. Like
No.
there's always going to be
Right.
always going to be students now. We're lifelong healing learners now. But I will always see the beauty in the East Side of Buffalo and the people who have survived everything that is very specific to people who live on the East Side.
You mentioned the power that comes out of that resiliency, and the power that I think was most certainly on display after May 14th, and we know about some of the other incidents, including, of course, the Christmas blizzard last year as well. Mm-hmm. From you, now, if you can, and this is where it gets tougher, right? There's the days before you're the Poet Laureate and the days after you're the Poet Laureate, and all of that was going on, and you're reflecting on it, but are there any, I'll use the term synergies, it's a happy word, where that power of resiliency is leading to affect some significant change for the East Side community?
I believe so. But I think that one thing that we don't always discuss is the power of you having a memory, the power of your memory. I often talk about May 14th. And when I talk about May 14th, I talk about the food apartheid that's happening on the East Side and has been happening. I talk about the lack of economic growth in my lifetime. I'm 31 now. The fact that I've never seen my people actually build economic sustainability for ourselves. The fact that now when I go to my old community, houses are either abandoned or torn down with vacant lots. Like I think about all of that, and I talk about all of that when I talk about May 14th, because we have to remember what's happening accurately. When we think about May 14th, of course, we have to honor the lives that were stolen. We have to be honest about the things that led up to May 14th, though. That is where the power lies, the power of your memory. Because when you can accurately remember things that are happening to your people, that is where you find the will to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because when I think back on May 14th and I think about the fact that every single person that was in that grocery store didn't have another grocery store they can go to, that is where that will to say, no, we need to be able to build something for ourselves comes from. So while I'm trying to encourage and inspire and find that power and that synergy, right,
Sure.
for us to be able to heal and to rebuild and to survive and to make a better life for ourselves here in Buffalo, I'm also challenging people to be honest and to like really remember it. Like, I know it's hard, but don't forget that the day you found out what was happening, the way something dropped in the pit of your stomach, but there was also something deep down that said, I guess this would be a place that you would think something like that would happen. Don't forget that. Like, do not forget that. Don't forget that thing in you that said, this absolutely sucks, but it is the only grocery store in a Black community. It is the highest populated Black community outside of New York City. Like, don't forget those things, because that is where we're going to find that synergy in our collective memories and our willingness to remember things honestly. That's where we're going to get it.
I can see you getting a little more emotional than I think I've ever really seen you get, and so I apologize.
No,
for
it's
that.
okay.
But as you were talking about that, and it's clear that you have deep thoughts about this, and it's clear that you do not forget May 14th.
Mm-hmm.
How do you process that?
I think through writing, but also like my ways of processing everything that has happened, they evolve. And I let them evolve. Like, I don't think that the way I was able to feel better yesterday is going to work today. So sometimes it's writing. Sometimes it's not writing. Sometimes it's not doing the interview. Sometimes it's taking a break. I went on a cruise last month, and I was so excited because I didn't buy the internet package. So I literally was not able to use my phone for like 6 days.
And you survived.
And I survived, and it was so refreshing to not wake up to like 100 Facebook notifications and 50 Twitter or X, whatever, notifications and 1 million emails. Like, sometimes you just got to unplug. So for me, I just try to separate myself from everything, because what's happening in our community has become so closely tied to what I care about, what I write about, what I speak about. So sometimes I just have to stop writing and stop speaking and just kind of separate from it.
We're going to let you take another couple of minutes here to do just that. We're talking with Jillian Hanesworth, the first Buffalo Poet Laureate, with us on What's Next. This is What's Next on WBFO.
Birds, whether common or rare, delight me. That's what our new Now We're Birding and Enjoying Nature Club is all about. Oh yes, and the best is being with people who are also interested in wildflowers, animals, and of course, birds. Come along with us, won't you, Peter Hall and me, Stratton Rawson, as we lead monthly excursions to Tift or Rhinestone Woods Nature Preserves. To sign up, go to WNED.org/birding.
It's Reading Rainbow's 40th anniversary, and we're celebrating by releasing 40 full episodes of the classic PBS children's series. Look for new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday through February on the Reading Rainbow YouTube channel. They'll be available for a limited time, so subscribe so you don't miss any.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And welcome back to What's Next, our final few moments here with Buffalo's first poet laureate, Jillian Hanesworth. Jillian, it's funny when we were talking, setting this up, how you laughed, how, boy, you must be growing in stature because you don't have to come here early in the morning anymore.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to, our final sound bite here is from our early morning interview that we had once upon a time. This is, I believe, on the date, maybe the ceremonial reopening of the Tops. And you were kind enough to come in and talk to us bright and early that morning. It was really early in the morning live on the air on Morning Edition here on WBFO. But you also recited your poem, Water. Let's hear that right now.
Let the hopeful healing waters flow. Ushering a rebirth of our sense of self, let the flowing waters remind us of time, current yet fleeting like life itself. Large yet within reach, just as the ancestors. Let the hopeful healing waters flow, cleansing all pain and fear, all hurt and regret. Let the water heal our people, reminding us that even our small marks on this huge world are necessary. Let the hopeful healing waters flow. Let the water tell the stories of those that came before us, those who fought and believed for us, those with the strength and power of a high tide, those with the meekness of a still pond. Let the direction of the water remind us that there is a greater destination, and though we will never see that destination in our lifetimes, let the beauty of the unknown offer comfort and hope, for within water there will always be life.
That is Water from Jillian Hanesworth and performed by Jillian Hanesworth on WBFO. I think it might have been July 16th, actually, of July 14th, I should say, of 2022. Jillian, not going to necessarily, but that is on the wall.
Yes.
With the memorial inside the Tops.
Yeah. I went in on July 15th of 2022 and saw it. I've not been back in there since.
Yeah, you told me that day about the conflict that you had about whether or not you wanted to go in there anymore.
Yeah. But I did go in and see it, and I do have people all the time. I was at I think I was at a restaurant. Yeah, I was at McDonald's. It was not a restaurant. I don't know if you consider that a restaurant. But some woman walked up to me and she was like, "What's your name? I saw you on the news." And I told her, and she was like, "Oh my God, like your poem is in Tops." And she said every time she goes in there, she just takes a second at that wall to just remember what happened. And she said that she doesn't even want to have to go to that Tops, but it's the only one in her neighborhood. And having that poem there helps her. So I'm like, okay, even if I don't go in there, like, to know that there is still a way that these words are helping people, that makes me feel good.
You should feel good. And I know there have been, like you said, you're never going to forget May 14th. You're not going to forget the victims of that day. But there's been a lot of activity for you since then. I mean, and, sometimes, what do they say? Events, find the person. The person doesn't find the events, and perhaps that's what's been going on here. But you've done a lot of work, and if I'm not mistaken, nominated for an Emmy. Did you win an Emmy?
Yeah, no, I was nominated. But that's huge. I never thought I would be nominated for anything like that. So that's something I'll always be able to keep in my social media bio.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was work with the Buffalo Bills? Is that how that went?
Yes, that's for the Choose Love video we made, which played on TV and at the home opener the season right after May 14th, so September of 2022.
I think you did some work with the Buffalo Sabres as well.
Yep, I've gotten to work with the Sabres and the Bandits, and I've gotten to develop good relationships with the people who work for the Bills, the Sabres, and the Bandits. So I'm always able to say, like, hey, like, it's supposed to be Black History Month. My friend opened a bakery. Like, I'm going to feature that. But they also are, like, really helpful for me. Even when I do things like pop-up bookstores, things like that, I can call them and say, I need X, Y, and Z, and they'll show up and they'll volunteer and help actually set up. So the people who I've gotten to work with, they've become really, really solid friends.
It's they're great successes, and I'm so thrilled for you in that. And they also I also appreciate the respect that you show of the people who, of course, died on May 14th as well. So you're not poet laureate anymore. But you'll always be the first poet laureate. So what is next for Jillian Hanesworth?
Over the last few weeks, I've really been thinking a lot about, like, what is January 1st going to feel like? And I think what I've learned is that the things that happened while I was the poet laureate didn't necessarily happen because I was the poet laureate. A lot of the work to build trust in the community happened before I became the poet laureate. A lot of the doors that opened, I started knocking on those doors years ago. And everything just kind of happened at the same time. But I'm learning that I'm just me still. I had a performance yesterday, my first day not as the poet laureate, and I'm here today. So I'm just going to keep using my voice. I hope to either get in a little bit into radio or a podcast. I really feel like I have a strong connection with my community. So to be able to reach my community in other ways, a little bit more traveling, but I'm still going to be performing. You can still book me. And I'll still be around.
Nice. And
Yeah.
so you will come back and see us again?
Of course, anytime.
Thank you so very much. Jillian Hanesworth, the first Buffalo Poet Laureate, with us on What's Next. Jillian, as always, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.